showcasing Gilden Village, which is the purpose-built student accommodation created by future generation. This is the first time at Asheville that we've brought you student accommodation, and this is a project which is close to my heart, as 3 years ago, Asheville were part of this. Since then, the project has moved on massively, and a main contractor took over. Before I go into the details and tell you where the project is now, I'd like to share with you the history and the construction project cycle. Before any of the main structures were built, Asheville started on site demolition. Originally, this was called Guildford College. There were 4 buildings erected here, and we had to take them down one by one. The most fun part of the demolition process was when we started. This was previously a construction college. As we went through rooms, we found areas where you could learn carpentry, we found areas where you could learn mechanics, and then we found standard classrooms where I guess people did a lot of their written exams. Once the fun stuff was over, we got into the nitty-gritty of the demolition, and that was not without its challenges. We had to try and keep the road clean. We had to try and keep dust down. We had a lot of rainwater that we needed to manage because there's a field at the back here and areas of it were getting waterlogged. So we had pipes running through the site. We had no record of these pipes. So a lot of these we had to re-divert and reconnect so all the rainwater would be managed correctly and taken away. Also, we had to consider the archaeological elements here because this area is subject to watching briefs, which mean we have to excavate footings very slowly. And we found Roman ruins here. We found some old pottery cups, we found plates, and we found a Roman brick wall. As soon as we found it, we had to stop immediately. We had to alert the authorities, and they came down and they were in white suits like astronauts, and they watched us. They documented, took away what they could, and when they were finished, we were able to carry on. The next challenge we had was hazardous material. So there was asbestos all over the buildings. We had to remove all of that before the buildings were demolished. And then when we began to excavate and remove footings, we saw materials that looked suspect. We had those tested. It was confirmed it was, and then we had to have all of those removed. Once the hazardous material was gone and we pulled all the buildings down, we began to screen and crush the material so we could make a pilot map. At that point, the main contractor, McLaren Rush, took over. Because of the relationship that we built with them, they brought us in to do the muck away. So when they began to excavate and take out all the inert material, we came in with lorries and took it away. We took out over 2,000 loads. Now the project is almost completed, we thought it'd be a great time to bring you in and tell you about the entire process. With 533 beds of purpose-built student accommodation, a gym, a cinema, a roof terrace, and absolutely state-of-the-art everything, this place far exceeds all expectations of student accommodation without being elitist. On the way in, I couldn't help but notice this brickwork. I think I'm going to have a chat with McLaren Rush's project manager, Barry. Me telling you about the demolition on this site is just the Asheville journey. Long before Asheville were ever on site, the owner of this site, Southern Grove, Future Generation, and their owner, Andrew, had a number of challenges. Now, I'm going to bring Andrew in now to tell you about some of those challenges.
Hi, Daniel. How are you?
How are we doing?
Good, thanks. You?
Not bad. I always tell everybody that when you see a building standing there, there is a journey. There's a history behind that building. So Andrew's going to take it all the way back to the start, to 2016.
2016, yeah.
Tell us about the hurdles and the challenges that he faced.
We bought the site unconditionally, so there was no planning permission on the site.
Massive risk.
Massive risk. Huge risk. Planning is the biggest single risk at the moment in the UK property and construction industry. We then went for planning. We went for about a year working with the local authority. We got to the planning committee and we got refused.
Why?
Politics. We then went to planning appeal with the planning inspectorate. That took another year.
Your initial planning you went for and your appeal, did you make any changes or did you push through the original plan?
We pushed through the original plan that was recommended for approval by the officers. The officers worked for Guildford Council, and then we went to appeal on that basis, and the planning inspector saw that it was the right and fitting for the area and gave us the planning permission. But that took us 2 years from start to finish. And some of the challenges you probably don't know about is that we had equity and debt on the site, and those costs were racking up all that time, as well as we spent another £1 million on the planning costs themselves.
So you bought the site for 15 million, £1 million on planning.
Correct.
And you were servicing the debt as you were going along completely, with no planning at that time, complete risk.
Correct, complete risk. And this is what people don't actually understand. Property development is not for the faint-hearted. It's high risk, high returns, but lots of costs as well. I mean, totally at the moment, our finance costs are running about £5 or £6 million on this site alone.
Just on your finance costs?
Correct, yeah.
Wow. So I imagine before you got planning, you were lower than a snake's belly, and then you ended up at the top of the mountain on the day you got planning.
Absolutely.
I think you gave me a call on that day, actually.
I did. Yeah, I was quite happy when we got the planning consent. But then you go into the next phase. So the next phase then is the detailed design phase. A planning permission is just that. It's very outline. It has the general, disposition of the buildings, etc., etc. We then went to the detailed design phase and started to engage with the contractor, the main contractor, McClear and Rush.
You said it was recommended for planning.
Yeah.
Was it recommended for planning based on the necessities in this area or on the aesthetic look of it?
Combination. I mean, there is a general need for PBSA, purpose-built student accommodation. Typically in the UK, there are 2 students for every PBSA bed.
Wow.
So therefore, there's an underlying demand. In Surrey, there's 1.8 students per bed. So whilst it's not at the national average, there's still a fundamental need for student accommodation. And the bit that people don't understand and the viewers don't understand is that currently a lot of students are in what's called HMO, houses of multiple occupancy, which is a standard terrace house that's been converted for students. What we try and do here is provide purpose-built student accommodation for those students in a safe environment where they can learn and meet people, and then return that housing stock back to young families, which is what it was meant in, what it was originally designed for.
Wow, okay.
So that's why PBSA is very, very important in the UK. The reason why I'm doing this is that education is one of our best exports, and it's that's how I got to where I got to. Education is very, very important, and it's here to stay.
Having a look around and just reading it off paper, this appears more like some sort of exclusive members club than it does student dorms. I mean, I went to uni. This looks nothing like the place where I went to uni. Can you explain that?
Sure. I mean, absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, PBSA, they're raising the bar all the time. We have got direct competition. Some of that competition is close to the town. So what we try and do in any built form is, create something that people want, young people want. And what we've done here is we've used the architecture, the design, we designed from the inside out, but also the facilities that we have to basically make it the best proposition, obviously at value for money. And that's what a developer has to do. You have to look at your exit and work back.
This doesn't look cheap to me. If I'm looking at, if I'm looking at your competition, I'm looking at where those students stay. The cost to build per foot here looks a lot more expensive. How do your prices compare with your competition?
At the moment, we are the cheapest purpose-built private developer in the local market.
Wow, and how have you managed that?
Because we buy the land well. At the end of the day, it comes back to buying your land well.
£15 million is buying well.
Well, it is for 533 units.
Wow. What were the other challenges that you faced?
We have all the main challenges. I mean, here we've got oak trees, which are TPOs, so they're tree preservation orders. So the contractors had to work around those trees. That's challenging in itself. We have an unadopted highway here. So we've still got, we're 2.5 months from completion. We've still got current challenges around that. So we've got to connect into the sewer. We've got to connect to the electrical substation. As you know, we usually did the demolition enabling contract. We had problems with asbestos. Yeah. We had archaeology on the site. These are all mainstream issues that you have in property development.
When you originally priced this, how much did you have as your contingency, and have you gone over budget?
Overall, we probably have gone a little bit over budget, certainly over time on the financing costs, as I mentioned earlier. But to be honest, with McClear and Rush, we'll be delivering it within the contract sum. Wow. And the final account will look pretty good. But this is breaking back to about £70,000 a bed, so you can probably work it out. It's around £40 million build contract here for the main build.
15 million to buy?
Yeah.
1 million at planning?
Correct.
40 million build?
Correct.
And throw us in some other figures so we can just give them...
Finance costs about £6 million.
6 million?
So yeah, it's a big number. It's not for the faint-hearted.
And what are we renting out? A rough number? You don't have to tell us.
Yeah, the ensuite rooms at the moment are retailing about £199 a week.
£199 a week, and let's hope for...
Which seems expensive, but not for Surrey. You got to remember, we're 40 minutes from London here.
Yes.
So there is almost a London weight into those prices.
Okay. So if I were to take that figure and times it by 533, if we had full occupancy, we would know exactly what Andrew's pulling in.
Yeah, pretty much, Daniel. Yeah, spot on.
Andrew, Southern Grove. He's got his name above the door, as I like to have. Tell us about Future Generation. What's the thinking,
Yeah, well, Future Generation was conceived about 4 years ago, basically on the back of this. This is the jewel in the crown. But Future Generation is a sub-brand of Southern Grove. So it's trademarked by Southern Grove. We've got our joint venture partners, Tadaman, who provide the equity and the support to make all this happen. But basically, it's a standalone trademark and brand used for our student accommodation, our PBSA.
Andrew, tell us a little bit about your vision here. When you walked around here first, before you bought it, you had an idea in your head. Is that exactly what you've transformed here?
I think originally, our original vision, we wanted slightly more units and a larger scheme, but then you're constrained by planning. Guildford itself has the University of Surrey. It has a need for PBSA, as I've mentioned, has a need for this type of accommodation. Now, there are some challenges. This scheme is about 30 minutes from the campus, the University of Surrey campus. So we had to have vision. We had to think, how is this going to work? How are we going to attract people here? And as you identified earlier, this is because of the facilities that we provide and the fact that we're in a park. So we're in Stoke Park. You've got natural, beautiful parkland around it. And students only spend 10% of their time on campus. So at the end of the day, they're going to be in a much better feel here, safe, secure, with all the amenities you can possibly, imagine. And that's why we call it Gildon Village. It literally is a village in this location.
So originally you wanted more beds. So by having less beds and providing all these amenities, did you actually take a haircut off your original bottom line?
Yeah, I mean, it's inevitable. If you buy a site unconditionally and you have to go through the planning process, your original vision and the end doesn't always match up. It's very, very unlikely. But it worked within the constraints that we had, and we've obviously moved forward. If it wasn't, if we couldn't make a profit, we wouldn't have funded it, we wouldn't be able to move forward.
You mentioned somebody providing equity.
Yeah.
Tell us about the other sites you've got and how much equity you've put into there, what sites you've bought there. You're not going to get away with it. Everybody wants to know figures. We want to know figures. Tell us, Andrew.
That's fine. There's about 60 million of equity swimming around in our sites in Steel City, Sheffield, Hythe Mills in Colchester, the Luxurio in Loughborough, the Vantage in Nottingham, and of course the Jewel and the Crown, Gildon Village in Guildford.
Guys, yeah, there's 60 million just swimming around. That was the owner of the site, Andrew Southern. Now, we are lucky enough to have the project manager, which is Barry at McLaren Rush. And if by magic he may be round this corner...
Daniel, good to see you again.
Barry is the project manager of this site. He has managed the entire site as soon as Asheville handed it over. Barry, can you show us around?
Yeah, let's have a look.
Let's go. Let's talk a little bit about our history, because we handed the site over to you guys. We were basically put in a basket and given to you by Andrew, weren't we? So he was like, you two get on with it, just carry on. So you didn't have to use us.
Didn't have to, but Andrew politely introduced you guys to us and vouched for you in some regard, which was good. We needed someone with the capabilities of taking the muck away from site. There was 416 piles on site at 25 metres deep, 415 millimetre in diameter. As we're piling into the ground, there's a lot of muck at 25 metres deep to come out. We needed to get that off site.
I can imagine when you're going into the ground, as the muck is coming out, if you don't get rid of it immediately, it's a space problem. And if you were to fall behind on program at that early stage, it'd be catastrophic now. Obviously, everything's a knock-on. I don't need to tell the project manager of the year.
I don't know about that just yet. Space is one thing, but if you recall, the weather at that time was atrocious.
Yes, it was.
Absolutely atrocious. The diggers, the dumpers going through that period of time was generating more muck as well, and the more we had it sitting here, the more effectively it was turning into soup. So we needed it off-site, and thankfully, not to big you up, but someone with the capabilities of Asheville that had the fleet that you had.
I remember some days, what do we take, between 50 and 70 loads a day out of here, wasn't it?
There was one day we hit 80 loads.
One day we hit 80 loads. You hear that? 80 eight-wheel tipper loads out of here in one day, completely flat out. And I say this is one of the sites where we went, where as soon as we got there in the morning, it was like a stopwatch. Obviously on site, you work to the permission which you're allowed, which on this site was 8 o'clock. The boys were ready outside, we were lined up, everybody was waiting, and it was like, at the stock exchange when it goes dong, and everyone goes, ah! That's exactly what happened here. We had the lorries piled up on the road, straight in, machine driver was ready, loaded the lorries out all day long, churning it out all day long. So after the piling, what was next?
So after we did the piling, it was important to form the pile caps, and that was your substructure. So we have 4 blocks here, effectively supported off our piles and our pile cap foundation. And then we've got 4 ground-bearing slabs. Those slabs are tied in, the reinforcement are tied into the pile caps, which are tied into the piles.
Okay.
And from there, once we got the ground floor slabs poured, we went upwards with our concrete frame.
What do you think the reason was for 25 25-metre piles. Do you think it was the sheer size of these buildings and the weight, or was it the ground conditions?
Ground conditions.
Ground conditions.
Ground conditions. So, predominantly London clay.
So now that we've got these 25-metre piles, these structures aren't going anywhere.
These structures aren't going anywhere. No.
Something very interesting I'm looking at. Tell us about that.
This is a canty deck. Throughout the project, we're going to fit these bedrooms out with furniture, but you want to get the facade up to maintain your critical path. What we decided to do with this project was keep a loading bay out in each block, and we use those canty decks up there, so they roll out. You can load the furniture in with the tower crane, take the furniture into the building, and all the while our facade has progressed past it.
So that's actually a lot safer than balancing the crane and trying to push things onto each level. I need you to explain this brickwork to me, because I know it's something that Andrew is very proud of, but I'm actually quite interested in it myself, so can we have a look?
Yeah, let's go over it.
Now, tell us a little bit about this.
We inherited a scheme here, Daniel, the previous architect before the planning stage had a scheme which we later discovered that was predominantly designed to suit pre-CAP construction methods.
Okay.
Modern methods of construction.
Yes.
And when we went to market, we discovered there was huge lead times, like 24-month lead times on some of those products.
Yes.
So obviously that wouldn't have